I'm Park Howell, and welcome to the Business of Story, where I consult, teach, coach, and speak on the applied science and bewitchery of brand and business storytelling, so that you can clarify your story to amplify your impact and simplify your life.
I thought it was just a stupid picture of a pig in the ocean. But after hearing that story, I had to have it. Now I wasn't just buying a picture. I was buying a story. Story literally made the picture worth more money to me.
That's what businesses are about. People buy brands. People buy stories much more than anything else.
I work with a lot of big enterprise companies, but let's just say I always tell folks, drop the PowerPoint, close your laptops, start with your story.
If you want people to get engaged and you want people to act, you have to tell them an emotionally powerful story. That's with great characters, it's with uncertain outcomes, and it's with high stakes and drama.
All business strategy is a story.
According to Hamlet, and by the way, I've never quoted Shakespeare on this show, but this seems particularly apropos for this week's subject, there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. How often do we block our own progress in building our businesses because we are telling ourselves false and faulty fictions? Today's guest is an editor of sorts who helps people rewrite their internal narratives to achieve external success. And he performs these reframings through hypnosis. Jason Linett is a speaker, author, and hypnotist who helps leaders build million-dollar brands by crafting and living into a completely new story. He was named Hypnotist of the Year by the Mid-America Hypnosis Conference in 2017, and he recently published his new book, Work Smart Business. Lessons learned from hypnotizing 250,000 people and building a million-dollar brand. Rather than just hypnotizing business leaders, what Jason does is actually de-hypnotizes them, removing the personal blocks that may be holding back their business success. If you or your client is caught in an old story, then this episode is for you. Jason will reveal why the word because is the most dangerous word of all and how to overcome it. Why all hypnosis is self-hypnosis and how you can start right now rewriting those old stories. How to put the serial killer mind mapping strategy to work for you to help you clarify your true story. You'll also learn how to anchor your organic states of excellence to acknowledge those places where you are actually very, very effective. He even has a free offer at the end of this show, so stick around. Now, that's not a cerebral prompt, just a friendly recommendation. Jason says his process isn't magic, but the results can be magical. See what you think with Jason Linett on this week's edition of The Business of Story. Jason, welcome to the show. First question, are you going to be hypnotizing me so I'm not really me for the rest of the program?
We've already done that for the last half hour. Where have you been?
Oh, man.
I know,
I should have picked up on that.
If I beat you to the stereotypes, it's all right.
Well, I tell you what, it's great to have you here. You're my very first hypnotist on the show, and I've always been fascinated about hypnotism, especially when you're in the theater and you see these, characters attendees that become characters because the hypnotist has done something to them. And I've always been amazed. How do you get people to tell a different story than what's actually happening around them? But I don't want you to answer that quite yet. I want you to give us your backstory. How did you get into hypnotism in the first place?
So I originally was working in management and professional theater. So I wasn't the actor, the director, or the designer. I was the guy behind the curtains calling cues and making all the creative people get along, which right there is a nice, solid psychological foundation of training.
Where were you doing this?
That was a little bit of all over. I did some work up in New York. I did work out in sort of the western part of Virginia. Most of my time was actually spent in Baltimore, working with a big regional company that's out there. Mm-hmm. So that experience of, dealing with creative personalities and looking at how someone's able to step into that character in a matter of seconds, how to really refine what they're doing. And my side of it was that the management side. So for this beautiful moment on stage, that would be a series of a couple of dozen cues that I'd be calling behind the scenes. And somehow this theater company that I worked with, they had a great knack for picking plays that required the backstage crew to cook a full English breakfast, manage pets backstage, and also deal with children. So I burned out beautifully. So at the time, though, I saw a stage hypnotist, one of those entertainer type people, get up and do a presentation at my college. And just something about that was incredibly fascinating. And it's even more fascinating when you know the people up there in that show. Now, my story of it is a little bit different because, again, my friends were theater majors. He pulled up a bunch of my friends who happened to be actors, and it created this split reality that part of the audience is now checking out and going, oh, these are all actors. This is fake. And I'm watching and going, wow, my friend's really not that good of an actor. This is absolutely genuine. I got to learn this.
Really? So you could see it. You could see the
Yeah,
fact
I could tell that it wasn't just the putting on or pretending or role playing. I could see that something genuine was going on. And another side part of this was that as a teenager, I had a hobby of doing magic tricks, so like close-up magic, cards, coins. And there was a growing frustration from that if I could really do magic, why would I be carrying around a pack of cards? If I could really make money appear at my fingertips, why would it have to be these turn-of-the-century silver dollars? The ultimate magic trick is you say you're hungry, I clap my hands, and there's the sandwich. So with hypnosis, there was no secret to it. There was no prop. It was just all based on the relationship of people. And admittedly, I made a mistake in my learning that I was hoping to learn that stage hypnosis, the entertainment side, and all the books, all the videos I was tracking down were all basically hypnotherapy. So working with clients on a one-to-one basis, which wasn't exactly what I was looking for, but man, was it fascinating, and just reading and just becoming ravenous. And it kind of grew as its own sort of hobby off to the side, part-time profession, eventually doing a bit of a motivational program for high schools around the country. And really back to that burnout moment in the theater career, kind of realizing that I was earning more money from my part-time hobby than I was the full-time job. And just becoming the obvious moment to go, this has been nice. Thank you so much. See ya.
So you were sitting in the wings, seeing these characters play out before you all the time, and then the side hustle of just learning or being fascinated about hypnotism got you into that. And
there was, and also the aspect that, in that career path, the hours can be extremely long. You'd be working over holidays because people wanted to go see a performance on a holiday. And I had one of my former mentors in that old career say, well, you do this because you're passionate about the art, so you give your life to it. And when I heard that, something clicked, and maybe I should have censored myself in responding, yeah, I think I can do that sitting in the audience instead. So there was the offer for what I'd perceived to be the dream job. And instead, putting myself in a position where I forced myself to be successful, I signed a big, scary lease, and with the intention of now I have to make this work, rather than just dipping my toes in and saying, well, we'll see how it goes.
you just went for it.
Exactly.
How old were you then when you made this shift out of theater and into Well, it wasn't hypnotherapy. You were doing it for entertainment purposes.
Well, actually, it was I call it was a stage hypnosis presentation for high schools originally, but with more of a motivational slant to it. So the stage presentation, I was never the one in the comedy club or doing even the dirty show. That was never my interest. Instead, it was what will this presentation solve as a problem? What kind of solution can I present that this program, almost back to the old Warner Brothers and Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoons, there was a message they were teaching, that there may have been an entertainment flair to it, but again, getting down to what were schools dealing with at that point, I was making me do math off the top of my head. I was 25 years old at the time as I was leaving one thing and moving on to something else. And recognizing that, again, what can I do to go in and solve a problem in a unique way that especially I'm not doing the schoolwork anymore. A lot of that is pivoted to what I now do in the business world. Yet these kids are getting the finger pointed in their face. You have to do this. You can't do that. They're getting message just crammed down their throats, as opposed to how do we show people working together? How do we demonstrate people communicating in a better way and becoming those better community members? And the presentation crafted in such a way that's delivering that message, but the classic formula of first of all, get them to laugh so they'll actually listen.
Yeah. So take us to that very first time, because like you said, you saw it, you were fascinated by it, you started studying it, you did all this intake. And I kind of did the same thing around storytelling, understanding the applied science of it. And then when you actually see the bewitchery happen for the very first time, take us to that very first time when you rolled out hypnotism and you actually connected with somebody and realized you became their puppet master?
Well, not quite puppet master entirely. The mind is active and alert the entire time. They hear everything, they remember everything. And really, we used to use the definition of heightened suggestibility, and some people still use that. I tend to refer to it more of accelerated learning, that especially working with somebody one-to-one, let's take those messages that you're already saying to yourself and let them actually stick this time. Though I do have to mention one of the first times kind of cobbling together a presentation just to do around friends and such. At the time, then girlfriend, now wife, her expression was, "That was good, but you need to work on that expression on your face that's telegraphing, holy fill in the blank, it's actually working." That there's not really a way to practice this.
Your amazement was coming out on its
Yeah, it's
own.
not
Like,
really a way
holy
to
cow, what have I done?
Yeah. The stand-up comedian can work the empty room. The magician can work in front of the mirror. The public speaker can turn the camera on. This requires actually having people. And even in the one-to-one work that I do, here's two people I saw today coming in, both with issues with public speaking, and couldn't have been more different from the other, different sets of goals, different sort of end goals as to what the public speaking was supposed to look like, which again, the interaction, it's not just running the same patter script over and over and over. It's where my work is often focused on what's great about you. How do we harness that? How do we put that to use?
Okay, so what did it feel like that very first time when your wife is saying, Jason, you can't give us that expression because it looks like you can't even believe that this is working, but it is. What did it feel like to you?
It was just this surprise of, okay, yeah, I can do this. These months of studying and just reading as much as I could and kind of practicing with an empty chair really was paying off, and recognizing that, okay, there was something kind of viral about that moment in me and going, I want to do more of this. And sort of listening to those people around me, that this was one of those beautiful things that even though that first kind of demonstration was just something kind of fun as like a, party trick with friends, immediately here's a person going, hey, can you help me with my nighttime snacking? Hey, I've got a fear of flying. Can you help with that? So
Yeah.
listening to that audience, retracking back to, again, the fact that by nature of checking out the wrong books of the library, I guess, I was reading a lot more of the personal change content. And then over the years, realizing it's basically the same strategies. It's the context that makes it different.
Do you ever feel, or did you when you first did it, like a little creepy, like you were entering into kind of an inner sanctum of people's heads and like, ooh, I got to be careful when I'm, tooling around in here?
To be very honest, originally that was a concern. And that's where I went, okay, so I'm doing these presentations for schools and I know how to do it. I need to learn more just so I understand the ins and outs of this. And that's about when I went to take, more formal education in the process. And that's where we really hit on that theme that, as most of us talk about it nowadays, all hypnosis is self-hypnosis. That really that person is alert and aware the entire time. And it's not that I'm the puppet master controlling these changes, even when it's the person, let's say in my personal office where their goal is to quit smoking. It's not that I'm the one making them do that. It's really that I'm that, let's call it more up-to-date GPS, helping them connect those dots that are already there, helping to utilize. So as soon as I realized it was a much more symbiotic relationship, a much more collaborative process, that's where that concern went away. And I realized the value of explaining that to, whether it's the private client, that even seeing people around the world thanks to platforms like Skype and Zoom, or being on the platform and doing a talk to a corporate group and utilizing some of the themes of hypnotic language patterns. It always comes back to effective communication. And it comes back to, again, that collaborative art form of not just talking at someone to produce a change, but listening, utilizing, and then feeding it back in such a way that they're the ones really harnessing that change momentum for themselves.
Yeah, so as I'm unpacking this for myself, I'm thinking, well, we all tell ourselves stories and we're all living into our own story. And we then have collective imagined realities that we do with groups of people, of like mind and so forth. But what you are doing are kind of being, I guess, as editor/producer. You come in, you listen, you hear what maybe their narrative prompts might be to trigger an emotion or a habit or something like that. And then you edit those. You rewire them somehow through. Am I getting there?
Yeah, that rewiring metaphor is one that we consistently use. And especially you with your background in storytelling, the value of what we call in the hypnosis profession of artfully vague language. That There's moments in a story where you really want to draw out the details. You want to get so beautifully descriptive with the scenery, with the characters and the emotion. Yet there's also the place, kind of like good poetry, like a good piece of music, or even back to a play, that it leaves a little bit more to the imagination for someone to fill in. So let's give an example of this, of working if it's public speaking, and maybe confidence is the feeling that they want to experience. Yet perhaps instead, here is this feeling of excitement, this feeling of passion that they're wanting to get towards, which if I'm working one-to-one, I can simply ask the person, how would you rather be feeling? And then that begins to write the process for us. Again, they're giving me the notes. I get to now direct the scenery. As opposed to if it's a group environment, artfully vague language, sometimes saying less is more, which allows it to become much more influential. Because if I'm now talking about that feeling of confidence flowing through your body, that might not be the sensation you're going for. But instead, notice that positive change in how you feel. Notice that new feeling filling up your body. You could deliver that same language now to 100 people and get 100 different results. So the actual process of hypnosis, I go back to one of the early sort of turn of the century pioneers, a man who lived from 1900 to 1967, Dave Ellman. He described it as the bypassing of the critical faculties of the mind, which basically paraphrases to that automatic response of the mind. The same way that you can be driving in your car, thinking of everything other than driving your car, you still end up where you'd like to go. You're watching a movie, it's all fiction, you get swept up in the story. The same way that we catch ourselves stuck in whatever the old story used to be. Well, I just don't have the ability to scale my business beyond this specific plateau. And that's going to be true as long as we're telling ourselves that story. So shifting that narrative, shifting that position, and really helping them become the hero of their own story. And it's through, various language patterns of the process, utilizing what we refer to as hypnotic phenomenon, some magical moments, though a lot of my work comes back to the whole point of view that, look, you're already doing this. Let's teach you how to use those powers for good.
And to be more intentional about it. So I just literally, as you know, because I had to slide you back 30 minutes, thank you again for that,
Yeah, no worries.
got done with a webinar for Social Media Marketing Society as part of Social Media Examiner.
Mm-hmm.
And I share the same thing. The storytelling, these frameworks you use, they're already sort of built into us, and we intuitively use them, but we don't always use them. And so when you become more intentional about it, then you can have way more impact in your communications. And it kind of sounds like the same thing a little bit, the parallels anyways, with what you're talking about, is we're already telling these stories and you're saying, let's become more intentional about editing those stories and making them more positive to give us the outcomes we're looking for.
And unfortunately, that story too often is that I'm stuck in my circumstances, that the most dangerous word in our language can be the word because. That because of this circumstance, that's why I haven't gone after that goal yet. Because this is what's going on in my personal life, I'm tabling this goal for later. At the same intention, from some of my personal things, because I've got kids, because I'm moving my office to a bigger space in the next couple of months, because I'm traveling more and doing more speaking, because the book, because whatever, that's the reason to continue to advance that story. So to recognize that sometimes the real message is, and this is one of those things that I speak about, is that every bit of communication is hypnotic in nature, which somehow a story about Katy Perry, I think, best illustrates this. And maybe I should just stop there and let people figure that one out for themselves, but let's go ahead and explain it. That I'm at this birthday party for a friend, and it was this restaurant bar where they do karaoke, but the difference is you get your own karaoke room with all your friends. So rather than having to listen to 30 people you don't know for then one of your friends to get up, you get the party room, your own private karaoke DJ, kind of cool. We decided to play a game called Karaoke Russian Roulette, which was that everybody had to sing something, but you had to pick it for someone else. So by the time you were up there, here's the song you got. Here's a friend of mine that just to get the imagery, think of the stereotypical sort of college football jock kind of guy. And he's got to do Firework by Katy Perry. And he goes, I was angry for two reasons. One, I had to do the song. And second, I knew all the words. So we have advertising slogans, campaigns that we've never stopped and sat and went, I need to memorize that. My kids watch cartoons that I've never sat and thought I need to memorize the words to that thing, and yet they're stuck there inside of the brain. There's lyrics to songs, like the story just demonstrates, that are there. And if these things work so well, let's start to use these same principles on ourselves to start to change that dialogue of the story, that this is why I can do this. This is why this is the perfect time to make this thing happen, to start to use our own communication to become much more influential, not just with others, but also with ourselves.
So you have been out there and you've hypnotized, over 250,000 people and have learned from that. Is there one thing that you see is true in every single human being that's rattling around in our brain out there?
Oh, that's gorgeous. The idea that everything comes back to relationships. So not just the relationships with others, but also the relationships with ourselves. I meet too many people who, and even though we're just in an audio format here, the gesture I'm making is that of reaching up over my own shoulder and patting myself on the back. I meet too many people who are not really willing to celebrate their own successes, to take that moment and go, this is what I'm really good at. This is what my strength is. And yes, a side part of that conversation is sometimes acknowledging, let's phrase it as the positive, here's a thing I can do better. So in that aspect of this is where that self-discovery, that personal development side of things really comes into play, that rather than saying, I can't do this, instead activate it, put it in motion, take the steps necessary to change that reality. We're not stuck. The other side of it too is relationships within our businesses. That here's the person going, why is this person not sending me referrals? I'm a member of this networking group and he never sends me referrals. Well, in hypnotic language patterns, we refer to it as the meaning of the communication is the response that it gets. So therefore, if that person is not sending referrals, it's really my responsibility to demonstrate something that now builds that relationship, educates the methods to then send me the appropriate referral. Now we've got a true connection. Now I'm not just some guy who shows up at the same Tuesday, 7:30 a.m. breakfast meeting. Instead, we actually know each other. So to look at that whole through line that, especially nowadays, I mean, you were just doing a webinar for social media. All of that comes back to relationships. All of that comes back to building that fan base of, let's call it raving fans that want more of what you do.
And is it not just personal relationships, someone that you know, or that interpersonal relationship with yourself, but it's also maybe a relationship to that cigarette that you're trying to quit smoking, or that beverage, or something? When you're talking about relationships, does it go beyond just human relationships?
Absolutely. It's where we find ourselves, unfortunately, assuming the identity of our problem. That I'm addicted to this behavior. I'm not good at this. I'm not a computer person is one I hear very often in the business world, that there's something kind of safe in the identity that they've kind of accepted upon themselves. When, again, the old dog can learn new tricks, have that opportunity to try something new. And to go back to the story of Thomas Edison, the legend with his light bulb, when it wouldn't light up, he'd celebrate. Because the discovery of what didn't work was just as important of a discovery. So that opportunity to dissociate, to disconnect from that issue, which I'd share the number one strategy that I'm using at times as soon as it's a group of people or as soon as it's one person working with me one-to-one, as soon as I've got you laughing about that issue. Laughter is incredible as a tool. It's dissociative. The moment we're laughing at it, we're looking at it from a different perspective. The moment, I'll tell you the hinging point of working with someone to quit smoking, the moment that they're cracking up, realizing, oh yeah, the measure of success here is doing nothing. Yeah, I can do this. And the moment where that becomes their own organic idea, something that now they're crafting for themselves and they're telling themselves that story rather than me going, oh, this is easy, just do this. So shifting out of that identity stuck mindset is one of the biggest things to address.
So can you work it on me right now in a short little way?
Whatever you're doing, stop it.
Whatever I'm doing, stop it. Stop it.
Yeah, head over to YouTube and just do a search for Bob Newhart. Stop it. There's an amazing sketch that was on Mad TV years ago.
Just stop it. All right.
Just let the thing stick for itself.
Well, you've got these work smart principles. So how did you then start moving out of hypnotizing college or high school kids in a motivational way to get them to see bigger into business? And with your new book that just came out, Work Smart Business, Lessons Learned from Hypnotizing 250,000 People and Building a $1 Million Brand. So how did you make that transition? And then take us through some of these principles.
Yeah, absolutely. So the real origin of it comes from just simply listening to your audience. That I was out there working, when I started working more so as, let's call it the hypnotherapist, working one-to-one with clients in an office in Northern Virginia. It's where people in my hypnotic community and other related wellness industries, so massage, chiropractic, and so forth, they were looking at how easily I was filling up the schedule. And they started to then kind of, knock on the door and send me messages going, how are you doing that? So I started to lecture in those communities in terms of here's how you get found on the web. Here's how you demonstrate value. Here's content marketing. Here's social media marketing. Here's how you deliver a presentation. So people then logically take the next step to want more of what you do. So there's a whole, if you just simply do a search on me, you'll see all these business trainings that I do in those communities. And over the years, I'd have clients that would call up and they're going, well, I have this issue with public speaking or confidence in growing my business. And I'd always ask the question, even from day one, even just as a tracking mechanism, well, why did you call me? And sometimes they just give you the simple answer. Oh, I saw you on Yelp. Or, hey, I'm a referral from this person. But over the years, people were finding the other things that I was doing. And at one point, it's like, oh, well, I'm not just the guy teaching the business stuff. They're going, yeah, but you're the guy who teaches business. I listened to what you were saying in some of your YouTube videos or even your podcast. And even though I know I'm not in that little micro niche community of hypnotists, that's the message I needed to hear. So it's where a client would sometimes come in. There's one story that really stands out that you try not to fix someone's personal emotional issue just by throwing a different strategy at them, but sometimes that's what it becomes. She's a chiropractor who's coming into my office with issues with public speaking. And just for the sake of, let's call it the intake, gathering the nuts and bolts of what sort of themes we need to address, I come to find out she's now taken on a product line at her chiropractic office that she's now inviting her past and existing clients in to come hear the sales pitch for the series of products. And just observing her body language, just listening to her communicate, I had to kind of, test the waters for a moment to go, I'm going to say something, and if I'm right, let's explore it. If I'm incorrect, my bad, let's just get to the work of the hypnosis. But the reason you're nervous around the public speaking is you really don't believe in this product. Someone sold you this thing convincing you that this is the method to actually get your business out of the hole that it's in. But really all you want to do is be a chiropractor and you're not booking enough patients. And that's what you'd rather be doing. And that's why you don't want to give this presentation. And that's why you're nervous. And she goes, yeah, that's exactly it. It's like, so how about we work on that instead? We can create that false confidence and, turn it on and fake it till you make it. But instead, let's get to that organic aspect of what you want to create. So it's experiences like that where the people coming to me were not just looking for the personal change. They were seeing there was a business aspect to it as well. And the deeper you get into it, you realize it's all the same principles, which is where the book came about. So the whole mindset of looking at the power of premise was something I hinted at earlier, just didn't label. Flipping that because I'm in this situation, let's let that now be every reason I'm going to make this thing work. I talked about relationships, so redefining the whole sales funnel model and lead generation concept of really deepening that relationship the entire way through. Looking at how we produce personal change. There's something, we call this generative change, that here's the person who overcomes the fear of flying, but because of that now is able to travel the world. Because of that, meets a new circle of influence and picks up a new hobby. Because of that, they end up changing their career. And here's this entire story arc of that individual and everything that they've achieved, which every subsequent success is reinforcing, compounding that original one. So this whole mindset of just designing systems as the personal change aspect, it's not so much about what's wrong with you and how are we going to fix this. It's instead what's great about you, and let's harness that and let's put that to use.
Yeah, and I want to go back to that idea of the power of the premise. Again, the premise of the story you're telling yourself, we could be using because as an excuse. Because of this, I can't get that. Or you're saying now flip that. The situation doesn't change immediately, but because of it, let's use because as an empowering word versus an excuse word. But because this went down, I actually get to do this. Or
Exactly.
I'm learning more about that, which is leveling me up versus knocking me down.
Yeah, which one of the other principles is that of building assets and leveraging them. So assets not just being physical property. I'm in my office right now where I've got furniture and the physical space, but here's this asset. Actually, a client today is a perfect example of this, coming in for issues with sugar cravings as a diabetic. And she came in because she saw this video testimonial that this guy made me about 4 or 5 years ago. And that's an asset that I continuously use to this day. The same as you learn how to put on a webinar in your business. And that skill is an asset that you can then leverage to new audiences, to new markets, and new platforms and new products. So, this ability to consistently, you use one of my favorite terms of leveling up, like a video game. How do I do this better next time? How do I really refine these systems to really one up myself time and time again?
Yeah, but that seems like that would be normal, natural. You're going to do that just to get better at what you do and make your product or service that much better. But what it sounds like you're saying is we have an inclination as human beings to not go after the level up, to actually use the because excuse and be slower of the uptake of making something better. Is that right?
Yeah, it's where we'd find that potential roadblock, that's in the way. And just to expand on that metaphor, we take the different path and we're better off for it. To look at what are the circumstances. I think we were chatting before we hit record here that there's a bit of an ongoing maintenance issue that my office was facing, which kind of forced me out of the office for a couple of days while they fixed that. And that's really where here's a whole other segment of my business that took off because I utilized that time. When others could have been sitting at home frustrated, oh, I'm losing money on this because people can't come to my office and I can't work today. Instead, here's the time I get to use in a much more positive way to really look at the shape of the business and ask the question of how can I do this better?
So is it that we are all running around with that negativity bias that we tend to use because as an excuse versus because as an empowerment thing?
That's unfortunately the thing I keep hearing, that here's the one who comes in, and this is no commentary on the specific condition that I'm about to mention, or definitely not my expertise, because this is a different thing sort of beyond my obvious scope of practice. But here's the guy who came into the office years ago, and on a personal change, he's explaining, well, I'm bipolar, and that's why I smoke, which I've heard so many people use similar logic along the way. Now, the unfortunate thing is you can't throw logic in an illogical statement. To sit there and engage in the dialogue, well, other people who are smokers that don't have that, right? Yeah. Well, people who are bipolar, but they don't smoke, right? So why is it any reason you have to? To have that dialogue, he already knows that. Yet still, inside of that model of the world he had been holding on to at that point, that was the story. So we did the work. We talked through the change process. We built some hypnotic experiences and taught some skills. And the result of it was kind of fascinating how quickly it happened for him as he goes, you know what? I got enough to deal with in my life. I've got to balance medications. I'm checking in on a weekly basis with a psychiatrist, which has been really helpful. And while this is still something that requires my attention from time to time, I think it's every reason I deserve to not smoke anymore. I got enough going on. Let me just have one less thing to deal with. So the entry point was, this is why I have the problem. As a result of our work together, it became every reason why he hasn't done it ever since.
So you're not standing in front of these or sitting in front of your clients and you've got the mesmerizing hypnotic watch on a chain going back and forth and look into my eyes. And it just sounds like it's more maybe suggestion that you do.
It is. It's the more modern definitions that a lot of us are using is it's a process of, let's put in the word ethical, psychological influence in which hypnotic phenomenon may be possible. So we were able to create that magical moment, which what I'm referring to, if you simply go onto YouTube and just search Jason Linett Hypnosis, you'll see some of these videos where here's a person looking at their arm and they're cracking up at the idea that they can't bend it. They know it's their arm, yet they're not able to bend it. Something like in a stage presentation, here's the person who, fully as aware of the fact that they could stand up at any time, but in way of using that presentation as something entertaining, but also to drive home an educational point. They can't get up from their chair, or there's something right in front of them and they can't see it. The same way that we find ourselves in our business, and there's so many opportunities that are out there. And yet here's that person who's unfortunately telling themselves the story that there's too much competition out there. Someone else is doing it cheaper. Oh no, my competitor down the road just did a Groupon offer. I can't compete with that. As opposed to going, well, what is it that I can serve differently? What is some unique market that no one else is yet talking to? How do I solve their problem in a way that they've never thought of it before? So I'm using that demonstration where the hypnotized person in a keynote presentation, their eyes are open, and yet it's as if I've disappeared. And here's that moment, which is really helping to illustrate that point of you've got all these opportunities in front of you, you're just not seeing them. And sometimes just by that snap of the fingers, there I am once again, and you're realizing here are these opportunities that you can really go after.
Okay, so how does that physically work?
Class starts tomorrow. No.
That you got me there, and I'm looking at my arm, and I can't bend it. Somehow.
Yeah, it's about building the series of suggestions that naturally lead into that moment. So how do we start to sweep ourselves into the momentum of stepping into an alternate belief structure, which becomes this amusing split reality? Because again, that person is there with their eyes open. They're looking at their arm and they're going, I know I could, but for some reason right now I can't, which I'm using at times these magical hypnotic phenomenon moments, because this is where that story comes back into it. Where as soon as we establish that the reality that they perceived before is not as solid as they once believed it was, there's that foot in the door. There's that, sort of chink in the armor where now things are going to start to fall apart in terms of the problem and start to reveal the solution. So it's by way of compounding the idea, building in a sequence of, let's give some of the strategy behind this and how we can model it within business. Actually, I think I fully explained this one in the book. It's where we're compounding a series of compliance steps along the way. So imagine this. If I just simply give you the instruction to squeeze your hand into a fist and extend it out in front of you, if I can't get you to follow that series of steps, which let's just lay it out there, that's instruction. If I can't get you to follow those steps, do you think I'd ever be able to get you to the moment of try to bend your arm and it gets even stronger?
Right.
No, because the first step of that was just instruction, just a series of steps to kind of get the arm in the appropriate position. Then from there, I'm sort of what we call compounding and layering different language patterns to suggest the idea that the more they look at it, with every breath they breathe, as I count forward, it's getting stronger and stronger. Just like any good story, looking for descriptive language as it's strengthening, stiffening, being stretched across the room as if it's being comfortably pulled, throwing in metaphor as if it's stiff and rigid like a steel bar, which technically is simile, yes. But using every bit of suggestive language to start to build towards that moment. Now, the key takeaway, especially here as we're chatting business, is that my job is to calibrate what's going on there. And observe and look for that moment where just from doing this so many times, I can see that arm is already in that magical kind of position that they know it's their arm, but they're not able to bend it. And only once I absolutely know we have that magical result, that's only when I pivot my language to now say, try to bend that thing, it gets even stronger. Which, look at the shape of any good sales process, to wait for that moment where you are fully in rapport with your potential client, listening, calibrating everything that's going on. And when you already know absolutely they are sold on this process, that's where you make that pivot. So here's how we work together. The program includes this. I'm going to send you these resources along the way, and here's how you pay for it. When would you like to get started? To look for that calibration moment where we know that story is already solidified. We know that result is already in place. Which comes down to, again, just being in the moment, being present, and actually connecting one person to another.
And actually listening then.
Absolutely. Listening is every one of your senses. So I'm watching, I'm observing, and just getting every bit of feedback mechanism in place to know we've already got it.
Mm-hmm. Is that in your 10 SMART principles? I want to move into the strategies here, but number 9 in this on your list here is be hypnotic.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean by that?
Well, that one specifically is in the strategy section of my book, and it's always important to find really tightly condensed, catchy names for what you do. And maybe this one's an exception. I just refer to that as get the result before you go for the result. So it's again getting into the calibration. The mindset of being hypnotic is really something that makes the work that I do a lot more approachable to really anyone out there. We can go back to the question you asked earlier of, the swinging pocket watch and the stare into my eyes type thing, and perhaps observe hypnosis as being a more formal follow my instructions process. But let's go back to some of the stories that we've already, closed some of these loops on now. That here was the guy having to sing the Katy Perry song. Here are those advertising slogans that you already know. What happens if you step into that result in your own mind and live as if you're already there? What happens when we change your language in such a way that it's not the game of, if I can make this happen, if I can do this? It's where sometimes even what we call ourselves begins to change what we do. I used to, years ago, position myself as I'm the hypnotist. And in recent years, you mentioned this in the intro there, which thank you for this, of being a speaker, author, and a hypnotist. And it's by putting that sequence together, the story that I'm telling myself as to what my role is, was an exercise at first of going, okay, so I'm already speaking to groups, but if I position my expertise first and foremost as being a speaker, that's where I'm going to spend my time. By adding in author and working on the book over the last year or so, that became the exercise of, again, stepping into that identity that I already begun to tell myself about. So that's that whole be hypnotic mindset. Step into the result as if you're already there. And little nuances often begin to change. If you actually run the mental exercise, and yes, if you want to get creative about it, close your eyes and run the scene in your mind, assuming you're not operating a forklift or driving on a highway, have that experience of noticing that sometimes the way we carry ourselves differently. Our posture changes, our breathing patterns change. Spend some time to just marinate in that desired outcome and start to notice what you can already begin to do differently.
Yeah. Now, I just recognize the voodoo that you do because, folks, I quite often don't do the intros to these shows until after I have the guest on, and then I write through, okay, what was the premise of that show, and what are you going to get the most out of? I write it down, and then I go back and do my intro. I'm sure a lot of podcast hosts do that. But did you see what he did to me there? He gave me the power of suggestion, knowing that I was doing that, and said, well, thank you in your intro for calling me a speaker, author, and hypnotist. So what am I going to have to do?
Exactly.
I would have done it anyways, but you were going for the outcome you wanted. And there, yeah, I love it. I mean, that's absolutely fun. So, okay, I need you to work on me real quick. So this is a problem I have, and it's going to be really easy.
Mm-hmm.
I do a lot of these shows well in advance because of my travel. And I want to make sure that I don't miss a single Monday where I'm bringing quality story artists like yourself here to the business of story. My wife, Michelle, and I are about ready to leave. I'm speaking at the New Zealand annual social media conference, and we're doing workshops around that. And in Melbourne, Australia, I'm going to be gone for almost 3 weeks leading up to the social media marketing world, where I'll be in San Diego. So suffice to say that I have 5 or 6 or 7 shows in the can, half of them of which I still have to go and write and produce the intros to. And that hangs on me, that little project. And
Right,
these intros could be anything. It might take me a half hour to a couple of hours to get them written to where I really like them, get them recorded, and get them to the production team. So, Jason, what I need help with is, how do I stop looking at that like, oh, that's extra baggage I got to take care of when I've got the opening to do it, versus, no, I get to do that.
Exactly. Which somehow makes me draw out a story that you might already know, and some of the audience may already be familiar with. And, it's a story about a woman who was of royalty, and she was a princess. And of course, this could be a story about any other situation, any other person, any different, financial class. But in this specific story, she's a princess. And yes, the story does involve the stereotypical man on a journey to go save her. And try as he might, as soon as he got close to saving her, he unfortunately would discover a note that simply read, "I'm sorry, the princess is in another castle." And this young man, along his journey, along with his brother, not just regular brothers. They were actually plumbers, actually Super Mario Brothers on that quest to save Princess Peach. There'd be that time where they'd run into the turtle by accident and then the level of the video game was over. Or Luigi would fall down a hole, and it didn't mean you had to return the game to the store. It meant you got to play the level again. So the same way that we can look at, different activities in our lives, to look at exercise, to give a specific reference, there's a trainer by the name of Pavel Tsatsouline who tells his clients that you will never exercise again a day in your life. You'll never work out by the time we're done. Instead, you're going to practice something. You're going to get better at something. The more you do this, you're going to be refining a skill that you can repeat and understand how and why you're doing it with precision and in the best way that's possible. So I wonder what happens in your mind when you look at that experience of all these things that you've been dreading up until now and realize you get to turn it into a game. You get to turn it into something that you can do better the more you do it. As you think about it from that perspective, what's that feeling now?
Yeah, you actually want to do it. And it's not that I don't want to do it. It's just so much on the plate. It's like, oh, I got to get those done. So I don't have that one little bit of show hanging out there or rolling around in the back of my mind thinking, oh, that's one more to do. I got to do.
Which you brought up the idea of a director early on in this conversation, that really, as the person doing that introduction, you get to set the stage for this is what's unique about this. And sometimes when we're watching a movie, we might know a little bit behind the story as to, hey, watch this opening sequence. The first 18 minutes is one take. And now, yes, we're watching the movie for the appreciation of the acting, the storytelling, the directing of it. But there's other nuances of going, this is what's really cool about this. Or sometimes these random anecdotes of, hey, you see that actor? His arm was broken the entire movie. Oh, really? Yeah. Still not good. But again, by having that introduction, you get to direct the focus. You get to shine that metaphorical spotlight on. This is one of the takeaways. This is the real thing to highlight. You get to frame that story in such a better way that preps your audience to learn even more as a result of it, don't you?
It's so funny that you say that because end of last week, I had a chance to interview last week Jonathan Haidt, one of my favorite sociologists. He's written 3 amazing books, one called The Happiness Hypothesis, which if you haven't read Jonathan, you and your work in particular, I think might really enjoy it. The second one is The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. And the third one he just came out with was The Coddling of the American Mind. So again, it's the stories we're telling ourselves. And I got set up and we did the interview and I did just like I'm doing with you, writing down all my notes. And I'm thinking, okay, I've got to really nail this intro. I write the intro, I record the intro, I get it done, and then I go and exercise, just like you said, which is climbing out here, Piestewa Peak with me and my golden doodle, Hazel.
Nice.
And so I'm out there cruising along, but something in the back of my mind is saying, that intro just didn't do that show justice. I didn't really set the stage. I kind of cranked it out. I kind of knocked it out. And so I said, okay, I'm going to let go of that thought and open up what should the intro be. And I'm telling you, I didn't take 10 steps. And all of a sudden the intro just rolled out in my head. It's just like, oh, that's it. I mean, it just literally wrote itself. I came back that night, called Michelle, said, I'm going to be running a little bit late, need to redo this, re-recorded it, and put it up. And I'm like, yes, there's my intro. That makes the show right there. But it took me from being kind of negative about where I was with it, just trying to get it done, realizing I didn't do the show justice. My because was I got so much to do, I just got to knock it out, to change it to like, no, actually, I can use that tension to create a much better intro story.
And you did something there organically, which is that the brain is like a muscle in the sense that sometimes we have to let it rest. So we've been having the conversation and to go off, and if you haven't picked it up yet, one of my favorite words is marinate. You have to let it kind of just marinate there for a while and change that environment. My office is this 1,200 square foot training space, classroom, multiple rooms. And to rewind part of my story back about maybe 8-9 months ago when I was doing the first draft of the book, here I was getting stuck, and that's when I'd move to another room. Then I'd get stuck, and then I'd move to another room. Just change the environment, go somewhere else, which only one chapter was a bit of a sticking point in going, I hate the person at the coffee shop taking up all the space and just using the Wi-Fi. but damn it, I'm going.
Well, you got to change the scene.
Exactly. Change the physicality to change the mentality.
When I'm going through your book and going through your work smart strategies, I'm really curious about this next one, the serial killer strategy.
Serial killer strategy. Again, why don't we just leave it at that and let people wonder? So the story behind this is it's basically, let's simplify it. It's a mind mapping strategy. Yet when I was trying to do mind mapping, it was a strategy that never quite fit for me because as soon as I had parameters, I got stuck. If I'd written something, now I want to erase it and I want to move it around. If I got into some piece of software that's supposed to do mind mapping, again, there were parameters, there were rules of the software, and it became a bit of a challenge. So one day I'm brainstorming an idea and I suddenly grabbed the stack of Post-its. And I've got this storage room at my current office where this whole wall is wide open, which we eventually painted green for the whole chroma key effect for video production. And the whole wall is just covered now with all of these Post-its that were just all over the place. And the story is that, of course, Northern Virginia, we're known for having a lot of traffic, but sometimes that means a client is late. But surprisingly, most often it means that they're early. So I'm in the back storage room, the furthest spot from the front door of my space, and I don't hear my last appointment of the day come in. And he takes it upon himself to wander into the space and walk to the back room. And he sees me frantically moving around these pieces as I'm organizing this project. Jason? Oh, hey, Bill. And he sees this sort of, insane organization of paper, which the name comes from like every one of those crime scene movies or TV shows. When they find the sort of, the person's room where they find the clear evidence that, yep, this is the person who does it. That had to have been what that wall looked like at the time.
Kind of like the usual suspects when they're sitting there and the whole time they're going through that wall. Okay. Yeah.
Exactly. So it kind of looked like that. And I mean, he just mutters the question, is everything all right? I go, yeah, it's a book I'm writing. He goes, oh, that's a good idea. So in that format, which the travel version of this eventually can become, use the little Post-its and stick them on poster board. Even go to an art supply shop and buy one of those canvas bags. And I do not work for the 3M company, but let me now proudly inform everybody, only buy the name brand Post-its. Those are the only ones that actually stick. Yeah. So take it from a pro. So having that experience of being able to move the pieces around, where the actual formation of whether it's a digital product of mine, mapping out a keynote presentation, organizing my live training events, or even eventually the book, it's a more free-flowing way of looking at that mind mapping strategy, which then once you have it in a good logical format, then, break out the computer, break out the notepad and start to outline that stuff. But I found just that playfulness of the, like I've got a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, the way that they just, will play with things and build things on their own, just dump the entire Lego box on the floor and they just go to town building anything they can imagine. That we have this whole space that we can now begin to move around these pieces, which to then step back and sometimes realize, okay, when I work with business clients as a consulting process, it's a standard exercise just to say, come up with 100 headlines of things you can talk about. And for right now, don't worry if they're going to be podcasts, if they're going to be webinars, if they're going to be opt-in offers, blog posts. Set the delivery mechanism off for the future. For right now, just focus on the content. What are 100 talking points that you can express? And it's by doing this same kind of playful exercise with the Post-its and just moving things around, they suddenly realize, oh, wait, this is going to be a better live event. No, this one's going to be a better project. And it's just that hands-on playfulness of it. I found it really opens up that creativity.
And I can just picture that bulletin board up there with all that stuff on it. So while you are seeking the outline and path for your book, you're also sort of ferreting out that serial killer that is trying to shut the whole process down, right? You're just having fun. And
I think I'm going more for just the imagery metaphor and not the moving pieces of the.
Well, when you call it the serial killer strategy, I mean, come on, you've already built that in our minds.
I don't have it in front of me. Do I have it in quotations, hopefully? Yes, I do.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. So in closing, what are some things that we can do? I know you've got a note in here about, a chapter in here about self-hypnosis, but I mean, is this like meditation? I mean, what can we do after listening to this program that we can go start to reprogram our own brains and the stories we tell ourselves?
You got a couple of minutes for a quick strategy?
You betcha. Let's do
Cool.
it.
So again, it's always from the mindset that as I'm speaking, especially to a business group, the people that are there, some of them are in those startup years, but especially if I'm at like an association or even going to a specific company, those are already the people who are making things happen. And in many ways, it's that better mindset of good to great. How do we harness what's already there and put that into use? So there's a phenomenon that our minds are capable of, which is all based on a simple concept of associative memory. You hear a song on the radio and it reminds you of the things you were going through when you heard the song. You hear a random name. You mentioned your wife's name is Michelle. Guess what my wife's name is?
Michelle.
Exactly. Good choice there. Would have freaked out if you had a dog or a cat with the same as mine, but no, mine are Blossom and Lily, not
Okay.
Hazel. But again, where we find this ability of associative memory, you walk into a room and you smell something and it triggers memories of specific foods or cleaning supplies or specific locations. And we have that ability, which very often we're just kind of noticing it. We can actually use that to our benefit and take the lessons from Dr. Ivan Pavlov and his dogs. He'd ring the bell, he'd feed the dogs, ring the bell, feed the dogs. Let's start to establish our own ability to what we call anchor these organic states of confidence, these moments where we are in the mode and really performing to the best of our abilities. Which the side note to this is someone goes, let's say, to the big marketing convention, they go to the big self-help event and they're pumping in loud music, there's celebrities on stage and everybody gets excited. And the sad thing is the number of people who leave and the enthusiasm fizzles out and they don't take action. And it's not that necessarily the instruction wasn't as solid as it could have been. Perhaps sometimes that excited music blaring, people dancing in the audience is not what their state of effectiveness actually is going to be. So the best thing you can do is start to acknowledge those places where you are being effective. You wrap up the sales call and the person closes, they purchase whatever your service or product is. And as soon as you're still in that mode, do something sensory specific, which that's extremely vague. But what I mean by that is something you can repeat and something that is extremely specific. So it could be a deep breath and then saying a specific word, squeezing two specific fingers and kind of pulsating them in some way. One of the things I work with a lot with, whether it's, I'm surprised that this always aligns, the public speaker or even the athlete. That moment of just simply shifting that posture, they're learning how to turn on that confidence to command that stage just simply by triggering that action. So the first step of this is recognize when you are in that peak performance mode. And then, like on a computer, start to copy that sequence, start to copy that state of mind as if pasting it now into that specific action. Now, I don't know your specific taste in movies. I'm someone that I can get into most science fiction, but some of it I just start to fall asleep. I can watch some of it and go, I can tell this is really good. I just wish I was enjoying it, which is the sort of shameful point of now admitting that I only recently watched all the Star Wars movies, only because my kids now know what it is and they're asking about it. But yes, I can quote practically every line of Spaceballs. So whether your Schwartz was always with you or the Force was always within you, the whole principle of this is the more you start to replicate that technique, you are charging up that gesture, that posture, that word, that anchor, as we call it. And now the phone is ringing for the next contact. Fire off the sequence again, purposefully bring yourself into that peak performance state of mind. I mention Spaceballs or Star Wars because, again, the more you make use of this as a principle, the more automatic it's going to become for you. And the more automatic it becomes, the less you need to think of it as a technique because you can just turn that mode on. This goes back to where we started this conversation. The actor who could just walk on stage and they were 100% on. They had conditioned that ability, and you in your business and your personal life can do the same thing as well. We call that anchoring.
And it's just a matter of finding something that works for you. So it's not like you've got to have a guru standing there by your side. It's like, if I want to get super powerful or positive leading up to a presentation, I can do one physical thing that gets me in that mindset. And is it sort of that neuro-linguistic programming type thing where you are anchoring that by your physically, your brain is in that peak experience, but now you're doing something, pinching your arm, whatever it would be, just to connect those two worlds.
That is a community. Yeah, that's a community, neuro-linguistic programming, NLP. That's a community that talks about the same principle. In fact, that's that I'm teaching an NLP class starting tomorrow here in Virginia. So that's something that I do, though I'm always one to look at everything and go, but what is this also like?
Mm-hmm.
The whole principle, for those that are not aware of NLP, was that, we are replicating human excellence. Let's start to track what makes people effective so we can actually replicate it. How do we observe what's the system that makes someone effective and what they're doing? So it then leaves behind a trail of replicatable techniques. So again, back to that, foot in the door rapport with the corporate audience. You guys are already doing this. Let me show you how to do it on purpose and do it even better.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I mean, it's just such fascinating things. I love your new book out, folks. Check it out. Work Smart Business. All about, I don't even want to say bringing hypnotism to business, but it is kind of that.
Well, helping to shift that thinking. And yes, part of the original intention was that here's all the things that I've done in my business, and let's call it out. I'm in a world where part of your questions, which is no shame, no harm in this, the person going, do you have the swinging pocket watch? You're going to make the person cluck like a chicken. These are the misconceptions that surround the work that I do. And my work very often can't begin until I've satisfied those concerns. Now, let's take your audience out there. Here is the real estate agent. Here is the dentist. Here is whatever other profession, they don't have these barriers. So to draw inspiration from some rather unique sources helps us to think differently about what we do.
Yeah. Well, great. Very, very fascinating. Jason, how can people learn more about you? Where should we send them?
Well, I'd actually make a free offer to everybody that I've put something together that I call the Positive Influence Power Pack, which is 2 specific strategies from the book, one about ethical influence with yourself, how do you change your own thinking, as well as ethical influence with others, how do you move towards a mutually beneficial outcome. And to go to the website, that's the same name of the book, worksmartbusiness.com. That's where you can request that Positive Influence Power Pack. It sends you over the actual chapters of the book, and act surprised on the 3rd day when it sends you the audios of it as well, which makes it easier. So all the details of the book are also, again, over at worksmartbusiness.com. And to track me down in terms of my speaking or working as a personal client or business consultant, head over to jasonlinett.com, which the truth is you can spell that like 7 or 8 ways incorrectly and it will just redirect to the right place.
Oh, you got all the URLs.
Yeah, you have to with the last name Linett, but I'll spell it because it makes it easier if you just remember there's 6 letters, Linett. So jasonlinett.com, and also I'm on all the social media platforms as Jason Linett.
Well, Jason, thank you so much for taking the time to be on Business of Story today. I learned a ton, and I'm sure our listeners did as well.
This has been great.
And thank you all for listening to this edition. If you liked what you heard and you think you've got a friend, family member, colleague that would benefit from Jason's insight and how to reprogram, be more hypnotic, just do better at work and in life in general by being more positive, then certainly share this episode with them. It helps expand our world. And who knows, you just might be expanding the worlds of the people you're giving it to. So feel free to share this show. And of course, if I can be of service to you, head on over to the Business of Story. Happy to help you with tools, tips, techniques to craft and tell compelling stories that actually sell in this world, where you can be hypnotic in your own storytelling as well. And remember, join us next week when we'll have another amazing story artist like Jason here on the Business of Story. And until then, the most potent story you'll ever tell is the story you tell yourself. But if you're an active listener, you already know that. We've pre-programmed that. So make it a great one. Thanks for listening.